Be brutally honest. We are in the fight of our digital lives, and we are not winning.
State-sponsored hacking and cyber warfare will be in San Francisco for the world's largest gathering of internet security experts. Plus, Greece running out of cash again. We'll ask what that means for people living there. 10 years ago, the number of devices connected to the internet was under 1 billion. Now that number is 20 billion and growing. Mobile computing, driverless connected cars, and interactive fridges are a reality. John Chambers, the executive chairman of Cisco Systems, was in Doha this week. He's been involved in building the infrastructure of the internet since the 80s. I asked him where he sees the future.
You're going to have 3 to 5 times the impact of the internet in this new digital era. You can call it the 4th generation of technology, or you can call it a digital revolution. That every country, every city, every company in the world, every person goes digital. As you do this, the economic benefit is probably 19 to 21 trillion according to our studies. Some people say it's too conservative. That number translates, because it's a big number, to 1 to 4% GDP growth for every country in the world as you do this. And what it will do is completely transform every industry, every country, every city. That as you transform, you can do something the internet didn't do. If it's done right, you can make it really inclusive across the 7.5 billion people around the world. However, just because you led in the first generation of the internet, like certain developed countries did, it doesn't mean you automatically are entitled to lead in this next generation. And we're seeing some of the most creative ideas come out of countries that might surprise you. In France, the leader in Europe at a startup nation, where they focused on a digital France 2.5 years ago. And it is the top nation in Europe about new startups. India, instead of being a slow follower, suddenly with Prime Minister Modi, a vision of a digital India for 1.3 billion people. And instead of saying, wouldn't it be great to grow the economy at 5%, saying we can grow it at 7%, maybe even 8 to 10% is possible. And well-run states within India with 50 or 70 million people could grow at 10 to 12% GDP growth and double their income every 6 or 7 years. Right. So I get excited about the future.
Yeah, but how does a company like Cisco ensure this future is truly inclusive? You talk about all these people all over the world in these countries, but can it be truly inclusive?
Let's move to the Middle East, where I am. In my meetings at UAE yesterday, in Qatar today, and in Jordan tomorrow, there is an understanding that this can truly be inclusive for every country, and that you can, instead of just 10% of the people of a country getting the benefits, if done right, the whole country can. You see the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia move in the same way. And potentially, and I know this is a stretch in many people's minds, but we've been pretty good at Cisco of saying when there's an opportunity, the Arab world could leapfrog and skip a generation, if you will, in terms of leadership, and perhaps in a unique way in each country bring peace to the Middle East by using the power of digitization and creating a large middle class, largely through startups and small businesses getting much larger. Maybe a dream, maybe a reality.
8 or 9 years ago, I was at Cisco in London reporting on a new innovation. It was web conferencing.
Telepresence.
Telepresence.
Virtually, it's like you're in the same room.
And we were blown away by the fact that we could be in what felt like the same room as our colleagues who were in San Francisco, who were in other parts of the world. That was, as I said, 8 or 9 years ago.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about the Internet of Things, the Internet of everything. Which is kind of, I mean, what can we expect now? I mean, a technology like internet conferencing is so commonplace these days. We all use it at work. We all talk to our colleagues wherever they are in the world. What about the interconnectivity of everything in our daily lives, which of course teleconferencing has become a part of our daily lives now. Where are we going? What do you think, appliances that can talk to each other?
Well, you've nailed it.
Yeah.
When Cisco was started in 1984, there were 1,000 devices connected to the internet. Today, there's 17 billion. In 10 years, 500 billion. The whole key is to get the right information at the right time to the right machine or the right person to make the right decision. The end result will be new business models, an Amazon.com, a Uber. But the real end result can be you will probably live 5 to 10 years longer, because we'll improve the quality of healthcare so much. We'll solve cures to issues such as cancer we would not have solved otherwise. We'll be able to cater the medicine that we take to the uniquenesses of your DNA with a much higher success rate. We have the potential to dramatically grow the income of every person in the world and to educate people more like our kids learn. You don't have to explain to my 2-year-old granddaughter how to use a smartphone.
Yeah.
She memorized her mother's security code. At 2 years old, she could access any application she wanted, etc. What we've got to do is really use this technology to change the world and then also deal with some of the challenges that we talked about earlier.
How secure is this digital future? We hear a lot at the moment about, I mean, you paint a very rosy picture.
There are challenges.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
I mean, are there always going to be weaknesses which some people will look to exploit? Or is it
Yes.
ever possible to live in a digitally secure world?
I think there's degree of security. The answer is yes over time. If you watch, unfortunately, there's as much organized crime focused on cybersecurity as there was traditional crime. And that's because that's where they see the economic opportunities. A secure environment is a must, and this is why Cisco is attempting to become not just the #1 security company in the world, we already are at 8.5% market share, but how do you provide an architecture to protect your environment, whether it's here in Qatar or whether it's in the US or in India, to where either by malicious attacks or rogue nation states, people will try to do harm. And you can build a secure architecture to rematch that. But you've got to keep at it always, and it can't be independent products. If you as a company here have 40 to 60 security vendors in your environment, the bad guys just have to find the weakest one. If you combine those in an architecture, which Cisco is attempting very much to do, where all the pieces talk together to defend, much like the human body, to viruses, which we get attacked thousands of times a day, then that's a different outcome. But if you're listening and you're thinking about what industry do you want to be in, the security industry, we're short 1 million jobs worldwide. We're probably going to be short 5 million in the future. And I think we're going for the next 5 years just to be a step or two ahead of the bad guys in terms of the challenges. Eventually, can we make it pretty foolproof? I think we can, but at the present time, there are weaknesses, and the bad people in the world will always attack through those.
You always have, still are, maintaining a punishing schedule.
Yes, I love it.
What gets you out of bed in the morning? Are you still as excited about the future as you were, say 10, 15 years ago?
I'm actually more excited. You know, you've articulated it well. In the early 90s, we said Cisco and the internet would change the way that people work, live, learn, and play. And people said, John, you're a router company. And yet it did. But what you're about to see with digitization will be 3 to 5 times more the impact. You can suddenly bring economic prosperity to an emerging country. And an emerging country can suddenly compete in ways against a developed country they could not before. But it isn't a win-lose. It's the opportunity, if done right, every country in the world, every company, every citizen can have huge economic benefit. You've got to deal with the challenges that occur along the way. But to be a part of that is so exciting. To be here in the Middle East and not just talk about how this might be economically beneficial for every citizen in a given country, but to talk about how it might bring stability across the Middle East, to talk about a new generation of startups where in the UAE last night, I was with 10 of the hottest startups in the UAE and basically in Dubai. And when I shut my eyes, I could not tell, it sounded like I was in the middle of Silicon Valley. And these new startup ideas, from ride sharing to e-commerce to media, it was as good as you see in the world. And what this digital world will do, it will level the playing field in a way perhaps it's never been done before. What's been surprising to me is government leaders actually move faster than business leaders. 40% of the large businesses around the world will not exist in a meaningful way in 10 years. And when I first said that, many of the large automotive companies said, John, you're just wrong on this. They now understand.
Right.
Their models will be, how do they deal with a Uber, a asset sharing? How do you deal with people that will scrape the data from the car for really economic benefit in a very appropriate way, a Google, a Facebook, an Apple, etc. And so you've got to really think different about what this future needs for the future of each of us. But it does mean that the job creation in the future will be small to medium business. And that's why I have a personal passion not to talk about how on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange says 90 companies go public this last year. Normally it runs 200. If you're really going to have economic growth in the U.S. as an example and create 25 to 30 million jobs over the next 8 years, you're going to have to double what has been our highest rate of small startups. You're going to probably have to have 400 companies go on public on the NASDAQ, and instead of 35 on the New York Stock Exchange, for it to be 100 or 110. To be a part of that is exciting, and to, in our own way, try to change the world. And that's what's fun being an executive chairman. I get to do the fun things in life, the digitization of countries, perhaps play a small role in bringing peace to a section of the world, which we've not been able to do, to talk to startups who think like teenagers and are fun to be around. And then Chuck Robbins clearly runs the company and is doing a great job of it, and he's really doing the hard work.
John, it's great to talk to you.
It was
Many
a
thanks
pleasure,
indeed
as
for
always.
being with us at Counting the Cost. Now, what happens if hacking software run by a rogue nation attacks a government? In this fast-moving digital world, cyber attacks are becoming ever more sophisticated. Rob Reynolds reports from San Francisco.
For many of the 40,000 tech professionals attending the cybersecurity conference, the threat of state-sponsored hacking and cyber warfare is topic number one. The head of a congressional committee on Homeland Security raised an alarm.
I'm going to be brutally honest. We are in the fight of our digital lives, and we are not winning. It's clear to me that our adversaries are turning digital breakthroughs into digital bombs. And from Russian and Chinese hacking to brand name headaches, our cyber rivals are overtaking our defenses.
In recent years, major hacks suspected of being sponsored by hostile states have hit U.S. companies and government agencies, including Sony Pictures, Yahoo, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. tax agency, the IRS. By far the most ominous breach was the hack of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton's campaign staff. The U.S. government blamed the Kremlin, saying it was approved at the highest level. Russia denied culpability.
Our democracy itself is at risk. Last year, there was no doubt in my mind that the Russian government tried to undermine and influence our elections.
That attack initiated a ripple that ultimately rocked the foundations of a democracy.
Speakers proposed combating state-sponsored hacking by beefing up government defenses and setting up a separate cyber attack agency. They also urged greater cooperation between government and an often suspicious tech sector, as well as striking back when appropriate.
What we need now is a digital Geneva Convention.
Microsoft President Brad Smith proposed an international pact based on 20th century agreements that attempted to regulate conventional warfare.
For over 2/3 of a century, the world's governments have been committed to protecting civilians in times of war. But when it comes to cyber attacks, nation-state hacking has evolved into attacks on civilians in times of peace.
In dollar terms alone, the cost of hacking and online fraud is staggering. Experts here calculate that cybercrime will cost an estimated $3 trillion in economic losses by the year 2020.
Rob Reynolds reporting. A quick roundup now of stories to look out for in the next few weeks. Facebook is about to launch a standalone app for TVs. It's all about grabbing a bigger share of digital advertising. That market was worth $20 billion in the most recent quarter in the US alone. So it'll be interesting to see how Facebook aims to profit from your videos. Keep that one on your radar. Here in the Middle East, we're waiting for the world's first self-flying taxi. Dubai's vision for its future transportation needs is driverless, and so it says the egg-shaped drone could be ready for takeoff as soon as July. And back to the future. Remember the indestructible, reliable, uncomplicated Nokia 3310? Well, it first came out back at the turn of the century. That's right, 17 years ago. And it's due to be relaunched at Mobile World Congress later this month. Still to come on Counting the Cost, an army of worms from the Americas is marching on Africa's breadbasket, and Zimbabwe plans to fight back. We'll tell you how. The IMF is urging the Greek government to speed up reforms to get the economy back on track. So what next for Greece and its main creditor, the Eurozone? John Zaropoulos reports from Athens.
This Athens bus has been rescued from the graveyard. After 20 years of service, it's rusted down to the frame. There isn't enough money to buy the new buses Athens needs, so workers at the central depot are rebuilding old ones. Even damaged engines and gearboxes are taken apart and fixed. But the depot is fighting a losing battle. Of a fleet of 2,000 buses, it's managing to keep only 850 on the streets. Workers here warn they can't keep the system running for long.
We're talking about a few months, not years. We can't pull any more spare parts out of the buses that we've cannibalised. We've stripped them bare. From now on, when a bus is taken out of commission, it will stay that way until we get the money to buy parts.
That's a difficult proposition. Greece's transport budget has fallen by $100 million since the start of the crisis and is likely to fall further because Greece is under pressure from its creditors to divert more money to repay its debt. Those creditors are now in open disagreement about whether Greece can cope.
Greece's debt now stands at an unsustainable $350 billion, almost twice the size of the economy. The International Monetary Fund says that without significant debt relief from its European partners, Greece won't grow out of its debt problem. A leaked IMF report shows that eventually Greek debt will surge to almost 3 times the size of the economy.
That's because the interest rate Greece pays will rise from an average 2.5% today to 7% as its grace period comes to an end in 5 years. The IMF's refusal to be involved in the Greek bailout could derail the European plan, and that would ultimately bankrupt Greece.
Come July, Greece will be unable to roll over its obligations. Greece owes about $7 billion that need to be repaid, bonds that are maturing in July, held both by the ECB and by market participants. It will not be able to meet those payments without external financing from official creditors.
Technically, that would be the end of the line as far as Greece's membership in the Eurozone is concerned, unless Greece and its creditors can figure out a way to keep the bailout process running.
Well, joining us now from Cyprus, Philip Ammerman, Managing Partner at Navigator Consulting. Philip, good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. 7 years on, why has Greece not been able to climb out of this mire of debt?
Well, it's a very complex question, but in general, the problem is that the Greek public sector doesn't really have a plan for regenerating the economy and a plan for developing the economy. The public sector is divided between being a regulator as well as being an operator. In key sectors like energy or education, it retains a primal role, so it retains a monopoly essentially in these sectors. And as a result of that, it sees the private sector as an entity to be taxed and regulated rather than an entity to be developed. Because of this, economic activity is much, much lower and potential output is much, much lower than it should be.
So you're putting the blame, it seems, fairly and squarely on the Greek government and not Greece's creditors.
Yes, absolutely. We have to remember that right now Greece does have a high public debt. It's about 360 billion. But we also have to remember that the effective interest rate that's being paid, particularly on the euro loans which it's received, is extremely low. In fact, Greece's annual debt service payments as a percentage are below that of the United States. So Greece has an effective interest rate of less than 1.5% right now. The problem isn't paying the debt. or repaying the debt. The problem is getting the private sector to grow, to getting GDP to rise so that that becomes manageable.
So where do all these accusations about Greek debt being unsustainable because of the brutal conditions that are imposed on it come from? All these accusations that Greece's creditors are effectively loan sharks?
Well, they're not actually. A loan shark would charge a very high interest rate. Right now, Greece is paying Euribor plus about 0.7% on most of its loans. Again, not the IMF component, but the component which has been extended by the European Union and the European Central Bank. And that is far below the actual interest rate which Greece would pay on private markets, which, as you know now, is over 8%. So I don't see it really, I don't see that the creditors are loan sharks. I see that the creditors have extended a very large amount of capital to try to refinance Greek debt and give Greece the chance to step on its feet and grow. And unfortunately, this is what is not taking place. And again, a lot of the conditionality for getting growth, for instance, for licensing investments, for better regulation, this is purely a Greek national issue. It has very little to do with the Troika or the demands that the Troika has placed. In fact, the European creditors and the IMF have been encouraging Greece to privatize. They've been encouraging Greece to attract investments and to license investments. And unfortunately, this is a very, very difficult process, no matter which government has been in power over the past 7 years.
Philip, we're going to have to leave it there. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost. Philip Habermann.
Thank you.
Now, Samsung plays such a huge role in South Korea, it's sometimes referred to as the Republic of Samsung. It's also the country's biggest chaebol. That's a family-owned conglomerate which literally means wealth clan. So, what does it mean when the company's heir apparent is arrested? Well, it could have ramifications for the company's restructuring. Samsung needs to restore confidence in its brand after its exploding Galaxy Note 7 disaster. But now its boss-to-be is embroiled in a bribery scandal that's linked to the impeachment of the country's president. Trouble also at one of Japan's biggest conglomerates. We're talking Toshiba here. It failed to deliver its quarterly results last week after missing the deadline. It then predicted a $6.3 billion hole in the accounts and said its chairman was stepping down. Its large bet on its US nuclear business has gone sour, and big questions now surround its financial future. And Rolls-Royce has also lost some of its luster. Don't forget, this is one of the world's most prestigious luxury car manufacturers, and it's just reported a loss of $5.8 billion, its biggest in its 111-year history. The aircraft engine maker took twin hits from the falling value of the UK's currency and multi-million-dollar fines for bribery charges. And finally this week, they're small, but the damage they're causing is enormous. An outbreak of armyworm caterpillars is devastating crops in several African countries. Hara Matasa reports now from Zimbabwe.
Farmer Alice Kanyera and his neighbors grow maize in Zimbabwe. The small-scale farmers say they've never seen worms that look like this before. They've been told they're called armyworms, caterpillars that are said to march like an army in their search for food. They are ravaging staple crops across southern Africa. Pesticides don't appear to trouble them.
We are looking for labor to search for them because chemical they are failing to kill parasites. So now we are using people to search one by one and destroy it. That's the method we are using.
Are you scared it's going to get worse?
It is going to get worse. Because we don't know where these worms are coming from.
UN experts believe the armyworm infestation began in neighboring Zambia before moving here to Zimbabwe and other countries. An emergency meeting is being held in Harare to plan how to get rid of them.
What we expect is that we will know the scale of the problem in the different countries and how much it will cost to control the armyworm. We also expect that the countries will have a coordinated approach on how they can control this worm now and in the future.
Zimbabwe's Agriculture Department says armyworms have been found in most provinces of the country. Many people in Zimbabwe eat maize. It's a staple food here, but farmers worry their crops will be destroyed, and that could mean food shortages. The armyworms also devour wheat, millet and rice, important crops in southern Africa. The 3-day meeting in Harare is roughly 100 kilometers away from Alois. He says if he doesn't get help soon, his family will be in financial trouble. He and many other farmers here urgently need someone to tell them how to kill these invading pests for good.
Hara Matasa ending our show for this week. Don't forget, there's more for you online.